our architect Leonor. Today we are going to explore more on learning the concept of architecture and its types. Architecture is one of the modes of art expressions that contributed much to the history of arts, from its classical perspective to its modern perspective. Architecture continues to develop until this current generation. In this lesson, we will give it a chance not only to study, but of course, to be allowed to build our own concept and idea about the method of architecture. And to formally start our discussion for today, I will introduce to you our topic, which is the definition and types of architecture, Module 3, Lesson 3. In this discussion, we will have three objectives. First, we will have to define what is architecture. Second, we have to provide examples for each type of architecture. Lastly, we have to create our own architectural work. Now, we will start to define what is architecture. The word architecture is the art concerned with styles, methods, and design of constructing buildings, separating inner from the outer space so that the inner area can be used for practical purposes and aesthetic ends. The word architecture comes from the Latin word architectur and the Greek word architectu, meaning master builder, from the combination of archi, which means chief or leader, and tecton, which means a builder or carpenter. So now we will have two types of architecture. We have 10 types of architecture, which is categorized by Alan Gowans. So Alan Gowans categorizes architecture into several types, which have always stood for and served social institutions universally. The first type of architecture that we will going to discuss is the monument and tombs. So, monument and tombs commemorate the past of a society. One example of this is the Iwo Jima Monument at Arlington National Ceremony, and as well as the Grant Tombs in New York. Second, we have the shrine and sanctuaries. These shrine and sanctuaries are places of ceremonies and rituals, binding a community together. Some example for this is the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. and our hometown church in Signug. Third, we have the walls and forts. Walls and forts serve as the protection against attacks. So we all know that the best example for this is the Great Wall of China or the Tower of London, a military barrack or armory. So the fourth one, we have the shelter. Shelter provide basic protection against the elements. The elements, which is the sun, rain, wind, storm, and other elements. A barn for animals, bus shelter, or grade silo. First example of these shelters is our home. Fifth example of this type of architecture is the homesteads. Homesteads provide an ideal space to raise a family, your family's house. An essential element of homestead is the hearth. Sixth, we have the palaces. Palaces are the living and working space for rulers. One of the examples of these palaces is the Buckingham Palace, Versailles, or the United States Capitol. This is the place where government meets the people. Next, we have the public works. Public works serve as the foundation of civilized life. One of the examples of these public works is the windmills, roads, bridges, waterworks, and the railroads and subways, airports, and terminals. Eighth, we have a mansion. A mansion is a large homestead to include servants, wealthy individuals to proclaim superior social status. One of the examples of mansions is a Vanderbilt home in New York City or a large southern plantation built this. Included in the mansion category are the first apartments, condominiums, and hotels. 9. We have the shop and offices. These shops and offices facilitate for distributing goods and services. This shop and offices has the examples, which is the Villages General Store of Mall of America outside Minneapolis, or the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, one of our favorite dinner. Lastly, we have the amenities. These amenities are the places for community welfare and recreation, such as like orphanage, hospitals, libraries, museums, and somewhat institutional housing like nursing homes, fairgrounds, or a union hall. Those examples are the examples of type of architecture. First, we have the monument and tombs. We have shrine and sanctuaries, walls and forts, the shelters, homesteads, palaces, the public works, the mansion, the shops and offices, and as well as amenities. Now, we have done discussing the types of architecture. We will proceed to the history of Philippine architecture, which is led by architect Manuel D.C. Noche. The history and the culture of the Philippines are reflected in its architectural heritage, in the dwellings of its various peoples, in churches, in mosques, and in buildings that have risen in response to the demands of progress and aspirations of the people. Architecture in the Philippines today is the result of natural growth enriched with the absorption and varied influences. Our history in the architecture developed from the pre-colonial with its influences of our neighboring hood, which is the Malay Brothers. This continued in the Spanish colonial period and American period, and lastly, we have the modern contemporary times. As a result, the Philippines has become an architecture melting pot, uniquely Filipino with a tinge of Occidental. In the history of Philippine architecture, we have the late national hero for architecture, namely Leandro Lacsin, and once said that Philippine architecture is an elusive thing. This because while it makes full use of modern technology, it is a residue of different overlays of foreign influences left in the Philippines over the countries, and it become developed in centuries. The early Malay culture and vestige of earlier Hindu influences us, the Philippine architectural method, in the more than 300 years of Spanish domination, the almost 50 years of American rule, and lastly, we have the Arab and Chinese influences through commerce and trade over the centuries. So what resulted of these circumstances? This resulted that our Philippine architecture have been a hybrid style, a totally new configuration which may include a remembrance of the past, but transformed and framed in terms of its significance today in our present. So our Filipino architectural landscape is a contrast among small traditions, huts built of woods, bamboo, nipa, grass, and other native materials used by us Filipinos. The massive Spanish colonial churches, convents, and fortifications with their heavy earthquake baruchel. The American mission style architecture and buildings of commerce with their modern 20th century styles and today's contemporary, albeit modern monumental concrete structures of the cities. So these some circumstances that the Philippines had which lead to the construction of rural and native huts, which change little in the centuries. The design varies by region, but common features include a steep roof over on one or two living room area raised on posts or stilts 1 to 2 meters above the ground or over shallow water. Some huts have balconies. Floors may have split of bamboo, allow dirt and flood to scraps to fall through a pigs and poultry. And some space beneath the hearth may be used for storage or as a workshop. It also allows air to circulate and safeguards against flooding, some snakes, and insects. As families become more affluent in their frequently replaced roof with galvanized iron, this lasts longer but makes the house hotter and aesthetically more mundane. In the Philippines, we have the Bahay Kubo or the Nipa hut, which is the very example or the best example for these Nipa huts houses. It is a typical traditional house found in most lowlands all over Philippines. Originally built as one-room dwelling. The Nipa hut changed as family needs became more diverse. On the other hand, modern urban dwellings are typically two-story structures with a concrete ground floor. Its size of brick, concrete blocks, or wooden slats, and an iron roof. But during the 19th century, we have some wealthy Filipinos which built their fine houses. We see their houses like they are made of rocks and made of some aesthetically improved materials in this 20th century, which is usually solid stone foundations or brick lower walls. An overhanging wooden upper story with balustrades and copies shell sliding windows of a tiled roof. And that is what our Philippine history of architectural method have gone through. And to generalize our discussion for today, we have the architecture, which the art concerned with styles, methods, and design of constructing buildings, separating inner from outer space in such way that inner can be used for both practical purposes and aesthetic ends. And the one who categorized the types of architecture is Alan Gowans. And to generalize the 10 types of architecture, we first have the monument and tombs, next, shrine and sanctuaries, next, walls and forts, the shelters, homesteads, palaces, public works, mansion, shops and offices, and the amenities. So the architecture comes from influences of different era, the pre-colonial era up to our present. And the late national hero for architecture, namely Leandro Locsin, once said that the Philippine architecture is an elusive thing because while it makes full use of modern technology, it is a residue of different overlays of foreign influences left in the Philippines over centuries. And that's how we end our discussion for today. I hope you learned a lot in the definition and types of architecture. Again, this is your architect, Ken, and that's our discussion for today.